Welcome back to another episode of Fantasy Football to the Max. I am your host, Randy Isbell, and as always, with me, Mike Mitchell. Mike, we did all of the previews, all of our rankings last week, and now we just kind of have to siphon through all these injuries and news after the big dress rehearsal week 3 of the preseason. Are you ready?
I'm ready. I don't think anything could get more difficult than everything that we tried to cram into that last podcast. And I just want to say congratulations to the Chargers for finally signing Joey Bosa. And I know that there's one person who's very excited about that signing. Can you guess who it is?
Bosa's mom?
Melvin Gordon is the most excited person in the world that Joey Bosa has signed, because that takes a little bit of that hot spotlight off of him.
How does that take the hot spotlight off of Melvin Gordon?
Because Joey Bosa is going to have expectations, and Melvin Gordon has expectations. And if Joey Bosa's not there, Melvin Gordon gets all the expectations.
Spoiler, neither of them will meet expectations this year. Neither will the Chargers.
Do we even have expectations for either of them?
A little, maybe. Well, we talked about Gordon. We talked about Gordon on Thursday, and
right, we
whether
decided
he's going to get
touchdowns, and we took the over barely.
Yeah, so slight expectations.
Okay.
But do you know who we don't have expectations for?
Who do we not have expectations for?
Tony Romo.
That is true. Well, we did have expectations, and that was that he might not make it out of the preseason. And I'm pretty sure we hit that one square on the head.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the injury happened right before we recorded on Thursday, and it didn't look good. He tried to play it off and said, oh, if it was a meaningful game, I could have come back. Well, come to find out, he has a broken bone in his back, is out 6 to 10 weeks. But don't tell Dallas that, because some people in the front office still think that Romo may be able to come back far sooner than that. Again, I think they're just blowing smoke. And
a compression fracture just doesn't sound like a lot of fun.
No.
And his history tells us that the likelihood of him coming back any sooner than the minimum 6 weeks isn't very high. And then even if he does come back, how long before he gets hurt again? I mean, can you put any faith in that guy right now?
No, not at all. And that's where my first question comes in, because obviously if you've already drafted and you drafted Tony Romo, you're just kind of stuck with him. Whether you decide to drop him or not is up to you. I wouldn't drop him personally. Just let him sit on the bench and kind of just see how things work out. But say he was the only quarterback you drafted. Who do you go out in the free agent market and pick up to replace Tony Romo?
Well, if he was the only quarterback you drafted, I actually hire out as a consultant during drafts for anybody who does their draft and picks Tony Romo without any other quarterback. Give me a call. I will help you for a nominal fee. But logic dictates, I'd say, what would be a fair estimate? 18 to 20 quarterbacks probably get drafted during the draft? Is that pretty fair to say?
Maybe slightly. I'm looking at some of the rankings here, and I don't know if Ryan Fitzpatrick or Tannehill's getting drafted, or a Jay Cutler. Maybe slightly less than that, but it depends on the size of the league as well.
Yeah, I think, for 12-team leagues like ours, I think 18 might be a pretty fair estimate. About half the league, If you got
probably
one of those top-tier guys, you're probably not drafting another quarterback. But if you are looking for someone else, if Jameis Winston's out there, I would recommend him. Fitzpatrick has a tough schedule. Tannehill has a tough schedule. Matt Ryan, you could take a chance here if you want to. But one of the sneaky plays, and I know that you might laugh at this, Randy, but it's somebody that we talked about, or at least their team we talked about, as having potential to put up a lot of garbage time. And it's a guy that probably didn't get drafted in your league, and that's Jay Cutler. And we know that Jay Cutler is potentially terrible. But if you're looking for somebody to just maybe plug in for a little while, and to be honest with you, if I had Roma, I would drop him. That's my opinion. I don't want a dead spot on my roster for half the season or longer. So I would personally drop him and maybe look at picking him up later in the waivers, but at least keep that roster spot open. But if you don't want to do that, you take a look at Cutler's schedule. He's got the Texans, which that defense has not looked good in the preseason. They didn't look good at the first half of last season either. But you get past that, you've got the Eagles, the Cowboys, the Lions, the Colts, a maybe improved Jaguars defense. Packers and Vikings are decent, but then you got the Bucks, the Giants again, the Titans, the 49ers, the Lions. I mean, that schedule's pretty weak. So I think there's a lot of plug-and-play options, even for a Jay Cutler if you're really desperate. Just looking at somebody who I'm pretty sure not very many people have drafted, he might be one of those stays that comes in the late 20s there. And I know you like Robert Griffin too, so that might be someone else that people could take a look at. And then what about a Dak Prescott? Do you take a chance on a guy like a Dak Prescott?
It's tough to say, but I'll just touch on Jay Cutler really quick. And yes, I would semi-laugh at you just for the talent base that is Jay Cutler. However, you make a good point. Junk time is a crucial part of fantasy football and something that I don't think a lot of people really take into effect. And I think the Bears are going to be down quite a bit. I mean, you just look at that last preseason game, and they couldn't move the ball at all that whole game. But you don't do that for a while. Now you're down 28 points, and what are you going to do? You're throwing the ball. And they have two great wide receivers on that team that like to go deep. So junk time is a high possibility for Jay Cutler. And that's how I kind of feel about Robert Griffin as well. I think they're going to be down a lot and throwing the ball deep. You saw that with him and Josh Gordon in their last preseason game and hooking up. Another guy that I would kind of look at if you want to go for the safer bet is Alex Smith. Him and his entire team, to me, are just under the radar all the time. Just nobody ever talks about them. They just go along their business. They go out and win the last 10 games of the regular season, and they're starting to figure out the passing game, getting Macklin in there and Kelsey. It's not like it was a couple years ago where everyone made fun of them for not being able to throw a touchdown pass. They can now do that, and Alex Smith is one of those under the radar. He's not going to win you very many fantasy weeks, but he's not going to lose them for you either. He's going to go out there and get the 15 to 20 points every week. And if you've lost Tony Romo and you need that stability, I would look somewhere like there. And as far as Dak Prescott, I mean, as long as you're picking up somebody else as well, and you're going to just take the flyer on him, I wouldn't say no, but I'm not doing it. Yes, he's looked great in the preseason, but he has not ever taken a snap in the NFL, obviously. He started 16 games for Northwestern. That's not a body of work that I'm going to put my fantasy hat on for. So I'm avoiding Dak Prescott. I will let somebody else get him. I don't think that's a name that, we could tell you, just wait a couple weeks, see how he does, and then pick him up, because somebody in almost every league is going to take that gamble. I'm just not one of those guys.
Yeah, I believe you meant Mississippi State for Dak Prescott, but
I'm sorry. I'm thinking of Simeon. I was looking up Simeon stuff today. Simeon was the Northwestern quarterback. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're fine. But as far as Prescott's concerned, I mean, you're looking at a team that's probably going to try and take as much pressure off of him as they possibly can. He does have a Des Bryant there, and he does have some pretty decent wheels. I mean, obviously the NFL game is a lot faster, and those wheels will get tested if he decides to take off. But with Romo gone, I'm sure that the Cowboys are going to put a big onus on keeping him as safe as possible. I imagine they'll probably move the pocket, and so I can't imagine they're going to take too many chances with him. So I would agree Prescott's probably not worth the risk. As far as an Alex Smith, yes, his numbers are generally pedestrian, but you look at his schedule too. He's got the Chargers, Texans. He's got the Jets, which is a good secondary there. He's got the Steelers, the Raiders, who knows what that defense is going to end up looking like. It seems to have a lot of positive talk, but they haven't looked good in the preseason. Then you got the Saints, who are terrible. the Colts, the Jags. There's some reasonable teams in there that can be exploited through the passing game for a guy like Alex Smith. The only thing that I'm concerned with them is Kansas City loves to run the ball, and they have lots of running pieces there. As long as Jamal Charles is healthy, they're 2 or 3 deep at the running back position, and they love to run. So, for my money, if I was ever going to roll the dice on a guy like Jay Cutler, it would be this season, and only because Romo obviously went down and you're in a crunch. Mm-hmm. But hopefully you drafted 2 quarterbacks if you took a Tony Romo, because if you didn't, then you're going to have to look at a guy like Jay Cutler.
Yeah, and like you said, at that point, you're going to have to take the risks, like taking a Cutler or an RG3, and just hope you can save it. But, I mean, before we move on from this topic, obviously Prescott will be starting at least week 1, if not further, depending on what reports you read. But what is this going to do for the other talent in Dallas? If you haven't drafted yet, does a Des Bryant or a Jason Witten or Ezekiel Elliott move up or down on your boards with this news?
I think for Des Bryant and Jason Witten, they have to move down. I think Bryant drops at least 2 or 3 spots. And that's just because it's going to... You can't rely on Prescott to make the same throws that Tony Romo could make. And, teams are going to be able to take away the passing game, I think, a lot more effectively without Romo there. That doesn't mean that he's not still potential top 10 talent. I mean, obviously his talent is there to be a top 10. But the production, I think, will go down a little bit, so I would move him down a few spots in my draft board. Jason Witten, to me, without Romo there, I don't even think I could draft Jason Witten, to be honest with you. I mean, I know he's been a great tight end for a long time, but he's getting a little long in the tooth. His production's been declining over the last few years. And without Romo, I just can't trust him. As far as Elliott, I think it's almost a push. Just because now I think they're going to run the ball even more than they had intended to begin with. And because, with Romo gone, what else can they really rely on? You have the unproven Prescott. So I think for him, teams are going to stack the box a little bit more because they don't have that passing threat. So that could hurt him a little bit, but I think his volume is going to go up, which should make up for it.
Yeah, actually, I think I agree on all accounts. I still might take a gamble on Witten. A young quarterback like Prescott might rely on a tight end a little bit more. It didn't really show in their last preseason game. They had the one connection in the end zone, but really no other looks there. Sticking with the wide receivers, as you said, Des Bryant would stay in your top 10. We had 2 big injury scares this week for top 10, if not top 5 wide receivers. The first one we'll talk about is Julio Jones, who has a right knee injury and was walking around a bit gingerly. Do you have any concerns for Julio, or are you still taking him in the top 5 of most drafts?
I don't think that the injury sounds too significant, so I don't have him moving at all on my draft board. I think that he's still expected to return at the same time that as at the regular season, and we're still looking at almost 2 weeks before the regular season starts anyway. So I'm not too concerned about it, and I don't think the Falcons are too concerned about it either.
And actually, it was the right knee, or the ankle for Julio. It's the right knee for AJ Green, as we had changed things on our notes, and I didn't switch things around. But it was the ankle for Julio Jones. And I'm with you, as I'm not too concerned. Julio always has those little nagging injuries throughout the season, so something like this shouldn't surprise me too much. So it might have me drop him a little bit, where I would take an Odell Beckham above him. But you already had him in that spot, so I can understand that. AJ Green is the one that had the right knee injury, and he had suffered it early on in their preseason game. Came back out, tried to go, and it just didn't look right for him as he limped off the field. More concern there for AJ Green, or the same thing?
I think it's kind of the same thing. They said that he ran his knee into a defensive back's knee, and it sounds like it probably was just a bruise or something along those lines. And yes, he did come back for a play, and they took him off, but I think they took him off more for precautionary reasons than anything else. But it doesn't sound like he's going to miss any time either. So for him, I think he stays right where I have him as well. And I don't really believe that that either of those injuries are serious.
Well, with the news of AJ Green's injury and now Eifert being out for a few weeks, are you concerned for the? Do you think the Cincinnati offense in general is looking like it's going to be down a little bit to start the year?
Well, I mean, with Eifert out, that could definitely affect them overall, just because of the numbers that Eifert put up last season. I mean, Andy Dalton loved to throw to that guy, and like I said in our last podcast, I had Eifert as a top 5 tight end if he wasn't hurt. But they say he might come back for week 4. They say he might come back for week 5. They're hoping to have him back, by week 5 at the latest. And speaking of the control and guys that are going to be out for 4 weeks, I saw that those Ravens lost their second string running back, it would appear, out for 4 weeks. So it looks like that trash heap of a Ravens running game is already caught fire.
Hey now, come on, be nice here, Michael.
We have a surprise special guest coming out of left field, Robert Hagan, the Ravens fan here for the Football to the Max podcast. You two have had many discussions. I'm just going to sit back and let a Raven and a Steeler go at it.
I thought it was Jerry Lawler.
Well, I do get a little bit of that look in the face every once in a while, but...
All right, well, why don't you tell me, Robert, why you think I'm wrong about the Ravens' backfield? Because I'd like to hear you talk me into why I should draft any of the Ravens' running backs.
Well, you took a look before all this happened Saturday night with Kenneth Dixon's injury. I really thought that he was going to give Justin Forsett a run for the money. And you take a look, but, Forsett has something to prove this year after going down and having the year he did. I think Kenneth was pushing Forsett to get a lot better. Ken was leading the team through the first 3 preseason games with 22 touches and over 110 yards. And so, it's pushing him to be better. You look at Taliaferro, he's still on the PUP list. When he's going to come off, still no idea when that's going to happen. So hopefully within... by the end of the month, we should see, or by the end of September, Kenneth Dixon should be back. And I really think his presence as the rookie is pushing Justin Forsett to be better on that team.
Well, I would be inclined to agree with you. I mean, especially when you look at all the injuries that Forsett has suffered. I mean, it's been one of those cases where the guy just hasn't been able to stay on the field very much. And his numbers declined dramatically, too, from 2014 to 2015. He lost a yard per carry. And I certainly believe that the Ravens don't have that much confidence in Forsett. But let me ask you about one more name here.
Well, let me chime in on one thing on that, and I'll let you get back to that. As one thing these Ravens are wanting to do this year is, and we've talked about it on the other podcast with Sean and Randy, is that 21 injuries go down. They have a lot to prove. Joe Flacco's got a lot to prove, and both of you two know, I'm not the biggest Joe Flacco fan in the world, but him, Terrell Suggs on the defensive side, and Justin Forsett have a lot to prove with going down through part of the season. So I think that's a big thing.
Well, I don't. Yeah, I mean, I can see where the running game would certainly have something to prove. Personally, for me too, I think the Ravens' defense has a lot to prove. That's been I mean, that defense was just awful last season. The only team they could play well against was my Steelers. Damn it! But
hell yeah,
they were just terrible against the rest of the league last year. So that's the part that really needs to prove something. But I just don't know how confident I am in any of these running backs. Obviously, Forsett's going to get the nod early, and having Dixon out's going to certainly maybe give him a little bit of security for a little while. But what about Terrence West? Is he getting any reasonable looks, and do they have any plans for a guy like that to maybe split time with Forsett when Forsett's there? What do you feel about Terrence West's look in that backfield?
Well, I don't think they're very high on him at all. Yeah, he has had a few touches here the preseason. I think that it's going to be definitely Buck Allen sitting there in the number 2 spot, until Dixon comes out. But I don't see Terrence West being in Baltimore by the end of the year. And you might put a little mark on that, but I think he will not be on the roster by the end of the year.
Do you think he'll even get out of the preseason then?
I think he will, not knowing exactly when Taliaferro comes off of the PUP list, but I think he can make it to maybe about week 6 or 7, maybe, and then he'll be gone.
Or by week 6 or 7, he'll be the only guy left.
Well, hey, we've got to improve after only having 21 guys on the DL from last year in the IR, and so
that's hard to argue.
I mean, it's already starting. I mean, your tight end, Benjamin Watson, out for the season already, ACL tear. What are your thoughts on Gilmore? Do you think he's a worthy fantasy option?
If you look at the top tier guys, and you guys touched on this on the podcast on Sunday, after that first tier of, Gronk and them, you get into that second tier. But I think Gilmore drops down into probably that third tier worth of guys. He might be one, that you would play matchups with. If you are looking to get through on a bye week, he might be a matchup guy. Like Mike said there, maybe pick him up and go against Pittsburgh or go against Buffalo. I can see being a good game week 1 out of the gate that he might do good with, with Flacco finally getting his first start here last Saturday against the Lions. That might be a nice guy right there in the middle just to dump off passes to make sure that he's getting, as you would say, the comfortable passes for Flacco to make there.
All right, Mike, give us the correct answer. Gilmore draftable?
I don't think I can draft him, and that's just because I see so many guys in that third tier that I would rather have over Gilmore, and with that in mind, I mean, here's the other question I have, Robert. Just one last piece here of this Ravens debacle, but you guys drafted Max Williams last year in the second round. He's the first tight end drafted in the draft last season. Is Max Williams at some point looking to maybe even take Gilmore's job, or is Gilmore the definite heir apparent and guaranteed to be the guy there?
You looked at the going into preseason, and I scratched my head a few times looking as Sean and I talked on the other podcast that there was 11 positions filled by running backs and tight ends for the Baltimore Ravens, and 5 of them being tight ends. Max Williams, I believe, is the future. Dennis Pitta is pretty much, I think, on his way out. But as far as Gilmore and Williams, I think they might be splitting time, at the best. But maybe another year or so for Max Williams, and I think it'll be his team.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. And I know that Williams has been out with an undisclosed injury for a little while here, so Baltimore hasn't had an opportunity really to take too close of a look at him yet in this preseason. But it's just one of those things. If somebody does consider picking up a Crockett Gilmore, just know that they drafted a tight end in the second round last season who they're high on and are considering when he comes back healthy as being their future. And with that in mind, I just can't recommend anybody drafting a Crockett Gilmore, over some of those other names that I see in that third tier.
All right, well, we'll just have to call that an end to our little edition of The Odd Couple here, with Robert joining us for a little bit. Robert, thank you very much.
Hey, my pleasure. I'm glad I got the chance to join in with you tonight.
Yeah.
Thanks, Robert. I'll be looking forward to another 5-11 Ravens season.
Hey, I'm looking forward to that 4-point win in what is it, week 12 that we play?
Well, as long as that's the only one you get.
All right, well, let's finish off the injuries here real quick. Brandon Oliver, another ACL tear victim, also out for the season. He was kind of the third-string guy for the Chargers. Not a lot of fantasy news there, but do you think that gives Gordon and Woodhead a little bit more time on the field? Do you think they move up a little bit?
I mean, the only reason that I could see Oliver being on the field very much is if San Diego's playing from way ahead, and I don't think San Diego's going to be in that situation very often. I really think it hurts them more in special teams than it does as far as the running back position is concerned, and, unless they have some garbage time for Oliver. So as far as a return guy, he's a pretty good return guy, so I think it hurts them there more.
Yeah. A couple guys dealing with concussions. Carlos Hyde, any concern there?
Well, you have to have a little bit of concern for Hyde. I mean, the guy's biggest knock is being able to stay healthy. He just hasn't been able to stay on the field. And I love the situation that Hyde is in as far as being on a team that wants to run the ball, that doesn't have a lot of other pieces there other than maybe a Torrey Smith. There's a lot of no names in San Francisco. Hyde is kind of like he's it as far as it goes for running games, but he's already missed 11 games in the last 2 seasons. Last year he didn't even make it through half the season, and here he is with a concussion. And granted, they expect him to probably be back in time for the season opener, but he still has to clear the NFL's concussion protocol, and it's definitely a concern for me, and it makes me pause because Hyde's one of those guys that I was looking at possibly picking up in those later rounds as kind of a running back insurance guy. So but again, there's that injury risk. So you take your chances with a guy like him, just like anybody else. But if the potential is still there, and he's on a bad team.
Yeah, Hyde was one of those guys that I've basically been avoiding in any drafts. I know he has a ton of talent, but like you said, he has a lot of injury concerns. And yes, the 49ers do want to run the ball a lot, and it'll be a bit more up-tempo with Chip Kelly. I just can't see it, and especially when they start going down, I think Kelly will be airing the ball out a bit more, and Hyde will kind of get lost if he's even out there. Concussions are always that fickle thing that you just never know when they're going to be 100%, and a hard-nosed running back like Hyde could re-injure himself pretty quickly off of that. Another player with concussion issues was Des Bryant, who actually suffered a concussion in practice and missed the Week 3 game. Any concerns there? I mean, we talked about him a little bit as far as Prescott being his quarterback, but any concussion issues?
Well, I mean, I think his concussion issues would be the equivalent of anybody else with the concussion issue. He doesn't necessarily have a history of concussions, and he's got to go through the whole protocol too. But again, they're expecting him to be back for this regular season opener too. So I don't know if the concussion issue would be more of a concern to me than Tony Romo going down.
All right. Well, I think we basically covered most of the injuries that have fantasy implications. But now let's get into that big dress rehearsal week in the preseason. See if there were any big standout performances for us that we feel has changed our minds for a few players. But I want to start with the big news that has come out of the preseason. And no, it is not Colin Kaepernick. That is not something that needs to be talked about in a fantasy format. But that's Trevor Siemian. He is the Northwestern quarterback that I had mentioned earlier. Only 16 starts in college. Here he comes to replace Peyton Manning. He will be your Week 1 starter against the Carolina Panthers. Any way you're drafting him in any format?
I don't see how I can. I mean, I would have been more inclined to pick up a Mark Sanchez before I picked up a Trevor Siemian, to be honest with you, and that's just because Sanchez has NFL experience. But, I mean, the argument you can make in his favor is he's got two pretty good wide receivers there, and Demaryius Thomas on one side, and the name is suddenly escaping me on the other side.
Emmanuel Sanders.
Emmanuel Sanders, thank you. And so there's.
I know he left the Steelers, and you just want to forget about him, but
I have forgotten about him. He's dead to me. But as far as the help he has there, yeah, I think he's got some help at the wide receiver position, but it doesn't make any difference if you can't get the ball to him. I think Denver is going to be leaning heavily on the running game, and I don't see where I could justify taking a guy like a Siemian over others who, are still going to be on your draft board above him.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm right there with you. I'm avoiding it at all costs, and yeah, I do think this helps C.J. Anderson move up a draft board because, that's going to be the main focus. They're going to try to protect Siemian, kind of the way the Jets did with Mark Sanchez early on, where, he played a role, but they never really, put the weight of a game on his shoulders. They just said, don't screw up. That's all we ask is don't turn the ball over, make the passes that you need to, don't go out and do anything over the top. Because we have a great defense, we have a good running game. They're going to secure, winning games. You just go out there and be our quarterback. And I think that's what Denver is looking to do. But you brought up the wide receivers. Does a Thomas or Sanders drop down your draft boards, or were they already down enough figuring Sanchez was going to be the quarterback?
I have a hard time believing that Siemian is going to raise the production of either of those guys. I think a lot of it is just based on the talent that they had going in. But a lot of people have Demaryius Thomas, in their top 15, certainly top 20, just based on his skill alone. Emmanuel Sanders is a guy who's in some people's top 25, definitely top 30. So it's one of those things. It's almost. How do you feel about it? Do you feel real comfortable about having a Demaryius Thomas or an Emmanuel Sanders if you're running a fantasy team? I don't know how much I feel confident about it. Now, I know Demaryius Thomas has great wheels, like we discussed in our last podcast. He has breakaway speed in the open field, so the dink and dunks can work for a guy like that. But he's also had questionable hands a little bit. Last season he had a lot of drops. His numbers could have been a lot higher. So as far as the skill is there, but can they get him the ball in space where he can make plays with his legs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're about the same place where I would have had them if it was a Sanchez at the quarterback position. Obviously down a bit from last year when you had Peyton Manning before, Peyton Manning fell off the cliff. However, the name that kind of I've been hearing rumors of as the guy that is going to benefit the most from Siemian becoming the starter is their tight end Virgil Green, who Siemian seems to be very high on and looking for a ton, both in preseason and practice. So Virgil Green could be that sneaky tight end that now you can get late in drafts and get a bunch of workload because he has that comfort level with the quarterback.
Yeah, you like we had discussed prior, young quarterbacks certainly have a tendency to lean on their tight ends more frequently than, necessarily a veteran would, because they don't see the field as well. They don't make the big plays down the field as often, and obviously tight ends are bigger targets. It's hard to miss them most of the time. The only concern I have for a guy like Virgil Green is he hasn't done much in his career. He's been around for 5 years now, and a lot of that's because he wasn't the front runner there. But I don't know that I could spend a draft pick on a guy like a Virgil Green, but he's one of those guys. Maybe you keep an eye on him on the waivers. Maybe he has one of those crazy Gary Barnidge breakout type seasons. But again, I don't think I'll draft him, but certainly keep an eye on him.
Yeah, the example I bring up, and obviously it's a wide receiver I'll bring up, but when Nick Foles got the job in Philadelphia, his go-to guy was Jordan Matthews. Neither of them were on any fantasy radar, but because they had always been practicing on the second team, they connected very well, and it just increased once you got to the first team because they already had that repertoire and that bond, and Jordan Matthews became a top fantasy wide receiver that year. I wouldn't say that Virgil Green's going to go that far, but just that connection that you get from playing on the second team together can sometimes expand itself to a great fantasy year if both of you get moved up to the first team, which they both have. So this is something I wanted to bring up. Another quarterback that had an interesting debut in the preseason was Andrew Luck, making his first preseason appearance, and he looked good. 13 of 18 for 134 yards. But the number that jumps out at me is 3 more sacks. He got hurried a few more times than that. The Colts basically spent this entire offseason trying to bolster that offensive line, and for the big dress rehearsal game, it showed no signs of improvement. Does this worry you, not just for Andrew Luck's production, but him getting hurt again?
Well, I think it has to worry you a little bit, and when you look at the fact that they lost their starting left guard, possibly for the season with the torn ACL, that's certainly not going to help either. So when you factor those types of things in, I personally wasn't really that high on Luck. I mentioned it during our QB podcast that it was one of those things where Luck had that one breakout season, and every year we keep hearing how wonderful Luck is supposed to be, but I've only seen it for one season, and that's not to say that he might not be the man, but I have been a little bit reserved on Andrew Luck now ever since that season, just expecting him to, okay, let's see it. We saw it once, let's see it again, but there's plenty of players who have one monster season in the NFL and then never show up again. And I'm not saying Andrew Luck's going to be that guy, but if they can't protect him, Andrew Luck has a propensity for throwing a lot of interceptions. And for a guy who doesn't have a lot of protection, who throws a lot of interceptions, that could be a pretty bad mixture. I go back to his last 2 seasons. He had 12 interceptions in 7 games last year. The year before that, he had 16 interceptions. His rookie year, he had 18 interceptions. There's a lot of concern there. Now, granted, in that 2014 campaign, he had 40 touchdowns and 4,700 plus yards. That was his one breakout season. But I'm just reserved on Luck in general until I see some consistency out of him.
Yeah, I think before going into this year, I would have been in the opposite camp as you. I'd always seen Luck as the next heir apparent, but you brought up a lot of good points, and just kind of seeing how, other than that one good year, injury concerns aside and everything that happened last year, he didn't look that great last year when he was healthy. So you do have to wonder if a lot of people are giving him a pass just because he was supposed to be the big heir apparent to Peyton Manning, and they're like, well, it'll come in time, and maybe we're just not seeing the flaws that a lot of people like to point out in some other younger quarterbacks that just haven't matured like we had hoped. Go ahead.
Just real quick.
Yeah.
You got a prototype QB at 6'4", 240. He's a big guy. He's out of Stanford, so he's got a head on his shoulders. You have expectations just based on how he looks. And the Colts have been trying to justify letting Peyton Manning go 2 years too soon for a long time too. But Andrew Luck in the top 5, I'm not so sure. I'm really not. I have a little reserve there, and if I did draft an Andrew Luck, I'm probably going to pick up one of those second or third tier quarterbacks to plug and play along the ways, because I think Luck's going to have a few garbage games.
Yeah, another offensive line that really struggled here this last weekend were the New York Giants. I made a joke when we were coming out of the notes, but it was just because they were playing the Jets. The Jets defense is just that good. But any concerns for the Giants? I mean, really weren't able to run the ball at all. Couldn't get anything deep because Eli Manning had no time. You think it's just one of those preseason games, or are we starting to see a little bit of flaw in that offense?
I think there's got to be concern for them too. The thing is, I think the Giants can take a little bit more chances from a max protect standpoint, because they have guys like an Odell Beckham who can run by people or out jump them or just make fantastic plays. So, you can run more 2 wide receiver, 3 wide receiver sets and keep tight ends, running backs in the backfield to give Manning more protection. But at the same time, defenses can also take their chances in those situations too. So, yeah, you got to be a little bit concerned anytime an offensive line looks as badly as they have looked so far in this preseason, because it's just one of those positions where a lot of times, unless you've got a lot of young players at the offensive line that need some time to gel, those problems don't always go away.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I do think a lot of it was that the Jets were bringing a bit more exotic defenses than most teams are going to bring in a preseason game. I think that was their big dress rehearsal, trying all the different formations and blitzing combinations to try to get things to work out, and the Giants just weren't ready for it. But it is something to keep an eye on as the season starts, whether Eli is going to have enough time to get it downfield to those talented wide receivers. Let's just go quick hits here for some other big performances and see if it has changed your opinion as whether you draft them or not, or move them up or down your draft board. The first one here to me is very important. Josh Gordon, who of course is suspended to begin the season, but got out there on the field and showed a great connection deep with RG3. I mean, just 2 catches, but 87 yards and a long touchdown. I've talked about loving RG3 as far as a junk time guy. Does this prove my point, or do you need to see more?
Well, I mean, I think it certainly gives your point a better chance, but at the same time, Gordon still has a 4-game suspension to start the season, so we have to temper expectations there a little bit. I don't question what Gordon was as an NFL player. I question who he is right now as a person, and if he proves me wrong, then who could be happy? We're all rooting for guys who have addiction problems. Even if it's something as silly as pot. The NFL doesn't allow you to smoke it, so don't smoke it. It's that simple. If your boss tells you no, then you got to go with no. So you have to assume that there is some form of an addiction there, whether it's mental. We could go into a whole other podcast about that. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is, he hasn't been able to prove that he's able to stay in the NFL because he can't pass a drug test. And while the talent is certainly there, he's going to be out for those first 4 weeks. And yeah, I think he did look good in the preseason, and I think it's one of those things that, there's going to be some people out there who are going to be willing to roll the dice on him. And again, I even mentioned it before. If I still see a Josh Gordon sitting there in the 14th or 15th round, I'll probably take a flyer on something like that, really late. But I'm not going to spend any super important pick on a guy like him. I'm just not. And that's not to say that he might not prove me wrong, but at the same time, I mean, it's just a trust issue for me.
The thing I like about Josh Gordon, just in general, as far as the Cleveland Browns as well, is what better team in the NFL can you go to for those junk time points? I mean, we talked about it a lot in these first few podcasts, but it's just something that I'm very intrigued with as far as, taking those flyers on players because you know that they're going to be throwing the ball a lot. What better team than Cleveland right now would you get your junk time points?
Yeah, I mean, I see your logic there. The only problem is you won't be able to get any of those junk time points until week 5.
No, absolutely. I more think it's going to help improve RG3 as the season goes on more than Josh Gordon, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, again, Josh Gordon showed in the preseason he can still run past second-string corners and safeties, but we'll see, what kind of game shape he's in when the time comes. But it's certainly a guy to keep an eye on. I won't dispute that.
Yeah, another guy that I would like to keep an eye on maybe not quite draftable just yet, but I like how they're using him, is C.J. Spiller for the Saints. Obviously, Mark Ingram is your running back of choice there, but they really tried to get him more in the passing game. It didn't work in the preseason, 3 catches for -1 yards. But you could definitely tell that that is a huge option that they want to exploit, as he comes back from injury, of getting him out there in space, letting him move around a lot more. He was kind of handcuffed last year through all the injuries and not really being able to cut like he used to. It looks like he is healthy now, and he's going to be a dangerous threat out there in open space. Is he somebody that you may take in the later rounds to see if he breaks back out? Do you take him just only if you have Mark Ingram as a handcuff, or are you avoiding him?
I think you could certainly consider taking him as a handcuff. I don't think I want to take too much of a chance on him just because, he had 112 yards last year, and granted, there were some issues with his health, but he was there for 13 of the 16 games. And I really think Ingram has kind of seized full control of that backfield. And Spiller might be come in for spot duty, but spot duty's not going to win you fantasy games. So, if you want to take him as a handcuff, stand that, because there's probably going to be some teams that are going to have Mark Ingram as their number 1 running back, depending on where they're drafting and how they draft. So, handcuff maybe, but otherwise, no.
Yeah, it's fair. It's just a guy that I'm keeping an eye on, just to kind of see how that evolution works, as him in the passing game. Next, it's basically a group of people. The Tennessee Titans looked very, very good against the Oakland Raiders. Mariota passed the ball all over the place. I like that Andre Johnson seems to be getting a little repertoire going with him. And then you have DeMarco Murray, who's starting to look like the old DeMarco Murray. I think he feels more comfortable in this spot. Just out of the whole Tennessee team, kind of give me a couple quick hits as far as some of these talented playmakers for Tennessee, how you see them going into the season.
Well, from the running game, DeMarco Murray, I think, again, and we discussed this in our running back podcast, I think he's in a much better situation now. He's on a team with a young quarterback, a team that wants to run the ball, and he and Derrick Henry both look good against the Raiders, and we could blame some of that on the Raiders linebackers who could not tackle, and Jack Del Rio was very upset about how poor the tackling was of the Raiders linebackers. But talking about Murray, I think he's one of those guys who might be possibly a little bit undervalued as far as the running back positioning is going into drafts. He's a guy that's not even in the top 20 in a lot of people's minds as far as running backs are concerned. And you also have to consider, too, DeMarco Murray is still only a couple years removed from a tremendous season with Dallas. And people want to look a lot at what happened to him last year, but last year was just one of those weird things where he fell out of favor with Chip Kelly. He went to the owner and complained. It's just one of those things where I think he became kind of the locker room pariah, for lack of a better term, and I think he was pretty much already kind of played himself out of there. And it's one of those things where it's almost a rebirth for him, and he's going to be pushed by Derrick Henry too, which I think only makes his production even better, because the Titans have big expectations for Derrick Henry, and if you've got a guy behind you who looks like he can take your job, that's probably going to make you do a better job. So that's kind of how I feel about the running back situation. As for the receivers, Rashard Matthews is a guy who he's coming over from Miami, and he had a pretty good season last year. In fact, I even drafted him. He was one of my flyers last season before I traded him mid-season. But he's a guy who can make some plays. He made some plays with Tannehill last season. And then Tajay Sharp gets his opportunity as a rookie, and they have high expectations for him too. But, I still think that it'll be fun to kind of see how they use Mariota, how they use that run game, and what happens at that wide receiver position, because they kind of had two unproven wideouts And they have one proven running back who's in a bad situation and one high expectation running back and a growing quarterback. So Tennessee, again, they were my garbage time team from the earlier podcast. I think there could be a lot of potential there, but I think DeMarco Murray might be better than a top, he might actually crack the top 15 possibly, just depending on how things work out.
All right, let's hit some quarterbacks here at the end. Start with Brock Osweiler, who looked really good on Sunday. 11 for 13, 146 yards, and a touchdown. I still don't believe the hype. I still think he's an awful, awful quarterback, and Houston wasted way too much money on him. Is he moving up your board at all?
Not really. I mean, again, we don't put a lot of onus. You and I both agree that we don't pay a lot of attention to preseason because you get a lot of vanilla defenses. You get a lot. You don't get blitz very much. There's usually the schemes are pretty straightforward, and you and I might be able to make some plays out there in the preseason. But it's one of those things where I think that Houston wants to be a little bit more committed to the running game than they do the passing game. And he does have a big target out there. DeAndre Hopkins will certainly make some plays for him, so he's got a go-to guy there. But I don't see myself finding any scenarios where I'm going to pick up an Osweiler.
Yeah, another quarterback that is on the minds of a lot of people, Jimmy Garoppolo, who will be the starter for the Patriots the first 4 weeks, struggles against the Panthers. Any worries for that passing game? I mean, do you kind of get away from a Gronk a little bit? Does Edelman drop down? Are you worried about those first 4 weeks for those guys?
Well, I don't know that we can really drop them any further than they already have. We've known that Brady was going to be suspended for 4 games going in. I didn't really have a lot of expectations for Garoppolo anyway. I mean, just the name alone scares me away. There's just something about Garoppolo. It's kind of like a Gabbard. I just don't have expectations for some of those really strange names. That's just my own personal. I mean, I don't know. Does it sound good to know that your team is led by a Garoppolo? I don't know, but just I think that maybe we're seeing that our worst concerns about a Garoppolo are kind of proving themselves out a little bit here in the preseason, and maybe a Gronk and an Edelman do drop just a little bit because it's looking like Garoppolo is maybe less than what he was expecting, which wasn't a lot of expectations to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. A quarterback that's starting to meet expectations, Jameis Winston, who struggled in his first 2 preseason games, has a great third game. Has he kind of solidified himself as a decent second quarterback for your fantasy team, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's in that late second, early third tier. And again, he does have a penchant for running the ball, which that's always going to score you more points. And, to be fair, he was actually pretty consistent as far as his fantasy production last season. And his schedule's kind of wishy-washy. He's got a few good plug-and plays, though, that those first 10 games, he could be a guy that probably got drafted, but there's a chance he didn't. For you Romo guys, he's got the Falcons. The Cardinals wouldn't be a good bet, but the Rams are kind of a mediocre defense, maybe a little better. Broncos not so much, Panthers not so much. But then when you get past that, he's got a nice little set of games there with the Niners, Raiders, Falcons, and Bears. So there's some opportunities there for a guy like Jameis Winston once you get past those first 5 games or so, where he might be able to make some pretty good plug-and-play situations there. And, you take the Chiefs and Seahawks out, and then he's got Chargers, Saints, Cowboys, Saints. So he's got a pretty good schedule for plug-and-play options. So I would certainly consider him in a 2-quarterback draft.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's moving up a little bit for me. Just one of those guys that you could put in with a Phillip Rivers on your team and play the matchups games. And I don't think he's ever going to burn you like I was kind of worried about going into the season. I think he's starting to get comfortable with the NFL system. And he's got some great wide receivers around him as well. The final quarterback we'll talk about is your guy there, Mike. You were a little hard on Roethlisberger on Thursday. He looked pretty good in that dress rehearsal game. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, he looked really good. And I'm going to temper that. Obviously it was preseason, but also he's playing against possibly the worst, or definitely the bottom three as far as secondaries are concerned. So there's a little bit to take away there, and he had a little bit of a fluky touchdown with Antonio Brown where the defender got turned around and the ball just managed to slip by him, and Brown broke away for a long touchdown. But again, I mean, Roethlisberger's top 10. I don't have him in my top 5 or 6 personally, just because I'm going based on the fact that he's never proven he deserves to be there. But certainly it was a good showing for him, and he got to put the hat and the headset on early.
Yeah, I like that Steeler offense. I think they're just the way they can get the big plays so often is always so impressive to me. So many weapons around him. That Roethlisberger is one of those guys that I tend to target in that middle of the second tier. If I miss out on the top guys, somebody that I can still pick up and know that I can plug him in each and every week and be okay. One last little piece of news here before we call it a day. Is just a small one, and I'm curious if it means anything to you fantasy-wise. But Jeremy Curley, the old Jets wide receiver, was traded from the Lions to the 49ers. Could he see a bunch of play in San Francisco and be a target for a Gabbert? And if so, do you care fantasy-wise?
I don't necessarily care, just because, I guess what's the highest upside you could see for him? Maybe he makes it as the wide receiver too, but he does have Blaine Gabbert thrown to him, and you've seen more of Jeremy Curley than I have. I've never really considered Jeremy Curley other than one of those random guys that you have, but he doesn't mean a lot to me.
No, definitely not fantasy wise. I don't think, but it was just intriguing to me. Yeah, going to a San Francisco that, as we've said before, doesn't have a ton of weapons. He could find himself being one of those top guys there, and that's another team that might have some junk time. So just a name to kind of see how he fits into that offense as the season progresses. But I like him better in San Francisco than getting lost in Detroit as like their 3rd, 4th, or 5th guy.
Yeah, anything's possible. But you got Gabbert thrown to him, so temper expectations even if you manage to get into the top 2 or 3.
Yeah, absolutely. But any other news from you? I think that just about wraps it up for us.
Well, I just wanted to say real quick, we want to give a big thanks again to Epic Design Labs for helping us out with our web design and marketing for our upcoming website. And that's going to be launching on September 5th, folks. That's coming up next week, so looking forward to that, having our opportunity to be able to showcase all of the podcasts that we do. And again, big thanks to epicdesignlabs.com.
And actually, it's September 6th that it will go live. Sean messaged me while we're doing the podcast, and he doesn't want to launch it on Labor Day, so we're going to do it the day after Labor Day, September 6th. The W2M website will go live, and we'll have far more information about it in the upcoming podcast, both on this one and Football to the Max and all the other. I think there's 12, 14 of us now, different podcasts that are part of the network, and it just continues to grow week in and week out, and I'm just kind of excited to see where all of this takes us with the wonderful website that Epic Designs has helped us with.
Yeah, it's going to be great to have us all under one roof for best way to put it, I think, and it's going to look awesome. It's going to be easy to navigate. People are going to be able to find what they're looking for. And it's just going to simplify everything as far as having the podcasts, in a central location for people who are listening on various networks. Once we get that website up, and we'll be talking more about it, as the next couple podcasts come along too, just so everybody knows exactly what they're looking for and where they're going. And I can't be more excited for W2M.
Yeah, I'm excited for that, and I'm excited for our next podcast, which will come Thursday. No set up for us now, as we've already went through the rankings, and And nobody cares about the fourth week of preseason, especially fantasy-wise, unless somebody gets hurt. But most of the starters and most of the people that you're drafting will either play a series or not at all this weekend. So I think Thursday might just be a fun game time for us. We'll do some facts or fictions or plus minuses and things like that, and we'll just come up with a bunch of fun things to do. And if you guys have any suggestions for us, please leave a comment on our Facebook page, on the Spreaker page, on iTunes, anywhere that you can reach us. Go ahead and leave your comments, leave any questions that you have for us, whether it's a drafting question or just any players in general, and we will hit that on Thursday.
Yeah, and we'll be throwing out our You Betcha challenges on the website once we launch that too. So we'll invite you guys to make your votes as to who you think is going to win our You Betcha challenges between Randy and I. And again, like Randy said, we invite all comments, questions. If you've got any disagreements even with us, where you think that one of us has just completely lost our mind, just keep it clean. But we're more than welcome to hear criticisms as well as anything that you agree with us, and suggestions. Like Randy said, we're always welcome.
Mike, we went through this whole podcast. We haven't had a single You Betcha challenge. Do you want to fix that right now?
Well, have you got one to propose to me?
I have one to propose to you. Since we are basically in the junk time of this podcast, let's put up a couple junk time quarterbacks. I'll take Robert Griffin. You take Jay Cutler. To go back to an earlier conversation.
Yeah, I'll be taking your junk time guy, but I'll be taking it against a guy that I'm not quite as high on as you are. So I will accept that You Betcha challenge.
All right, there. We got one in. So I'll take RG3. He's got Jay Cutler. You Betcha. That's 7 now that will be on the board when the website launches. I'm sure we will add some more during game time on Thursday. But until that Thursday podcast, thank you guys so much for listening. You guys set a huge record for us on the last Thursday podcast, and Mike and I were really ecstatic to see that, and we're excited to see this podcast and everything else kind of grow. So we appreciate and thank each and every one of you for tuning in twice a week with us. We're super excited for the season and to give you guys even more content. But until Thursday, for Mike, I am Randy Isbell, and for Robert, who was with us earlier, we will see you guys on Thursday night. You guys have a good one.